Hundreds of people gathered in the Qatari capital to press for urgent action to tackle global warming. The activists come from several countries in the region. They urge negotiators at the climate change talks and their own leaders to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Tarek Paisley has more.
Long part of climate change talks, the opportunity to hold public protest is rare in Qatar. But with the world's attention on the country for the COP18 conference, non-government and activist groups were granted permission to demonstrate on Doha's Corniche.
The general message of the march is to all the leaders of the world that if Qatar, the natural gas economic-based country, highest polluter per capita, is being positive about climate change and leading to change and allowing a march for the first time in its history, what are your reasons not to save planet Earth?
The tightly controlled march closed sections of a main road. The rallying call for climate justice.
More action! More action!
The small but passionate group of protesters have a clear message for the climate negotiators. They want Qatar and other Gulf states to take more of an active role and set an example. They also want the negotiators to listen to the scientists and act before the window of opportunity closes.
At the end of the talk's first week, there's little sign of progress. Efforts to agree to an extension of the Kyoto Protocol and to agree on a future treaty appear to be at a stalemate.
We are disappointed, however, that the developed countries are in the process of looking at low ambition levels under the second commitment period. We call on them to raise their ambition consistent with what is required by science and the principles of the Convention.
Pressure groups are also upset at the choice of Poland as the host for next year's talks, a country which relies largely on coal for its power needs.
In these very negotiations, Poland has held up the EU's ability to be more ambitious in terms of its target. So there are a number of EU member states who are willing to go to 30%, but they've been held up by Poland.
The protest groups are waiting for top officials to join the talks this coming week. They hope this will give the process greater urgency and result in their call for action being heard. Tarek Paisley, Al Jazeera, Doha.
The United Nations says 2012 is on course to be the warmest year since records began more than 160 years ago. And yet, the Doha negotiations appear to be at a standstill. In Eastern Africa, global warming is being blamed for the spread of malaria. From Kabale in Uganda, Malcolm Webb reports.
Fortunate Turia Hekayo always dreamed she'd grow old alongside her husband Enoch here at their family home in southwestern Uganda. But the reality is almost too sad for her to share with us. Malaria killed him.
He was a loving father, and he always took good care of the family. Sometimes after work, he would bring gifts home for the children.
Fortunate clears the weeds from Enoch's grave. She says there was no malaria here when she was a girl, and she doesn't understand why it's here now. Here, up in the highlands of southwestern Uganda, it's actually quite cool for a lot of the time. As you can see, it gets quite misty in the mornings. And this climate's not favourable for the malaria parasite or for the mosquitoes that carry it. But people that live here say they're getting bitten by mosquitoes more and more, and that malaria is becoming more common. This is the hospital where Enoch died. There's a steady flow of malaria patients. The medics also say it's on the rise. Uganda's malaria experts believe it's because of global warming.
The highland areas, which we are not experiencing burden of malaria, are increasingly being affected by malaria because of the climate change. And because these people are not immune to malaria compared to the general public that is exposed, when they get malaria, they get more severe malaria compared to the general public.
The ecosystem up in this hilltop region is fragile and it's easily affected by human activity. The relationship between climate and malaria is complex and not yet fully understood. But people here know that something's changed when they see relatives get sick and die. Fortunate's never heard of the UN Climate Change Conference, but she asked us how can it help her now. Nothing will bring Enoch back to her and her children. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera, Kabale in southwestern Uganda.